To help give us some better insight into the scorching conditions across Europe, Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick, professor of climate science at the Fenner School of Environment and Society at NEU, joins us live from Canberra. Professor, Europe is seeing temperatures well above 40 degrees in some places, and for the past 3 decades, it has been warming faster than any continent. So could you explain to us why Europe is heating up faster than the global average and what makes it particularly vulnerable?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Something that I will start off with saying is that with increasing global average temperatures, we're expecting to see more heat waves everywhere in the world. And when they do occur, they will be more intense. And Europe is certainly part of that picture that we're seeing now. But there's also recent research to indicate that the weather systems that cause heat waves, and by this I mean a persistent high pressure system, some people may be familiar with the term a heat dome, they're becoming more common over Europe as well. So when we get those weather systems, they park for longer, they stay for longer, and that intense heat that's exacerbated by climate change builds up. On top of that, the European region is very close to the Arctic, and there's a phenomenon called the Arctic amplification. And this means that the Arctic Circle, it's warming much faster than the rest of the world because the ice is melting. And then it's showing us darker coloured sea surface, which is then absorbing more of that heat, exacerbating the local heating effect. So there's really a confluence of a lot of factors going there. It is also worth pointing out that land warms much faster than ocean. Roughly 4 times the amount of heat can go into the atmosphere above the land than it does into the ocean. And this is, again, contributing to the faster increase in not just average temperatures, but also extreme heat temperatures that we're seeing over Europe at the moment as well.
And speaking on extreme heat, these heat waves are often called the silent killer. Why are they among the deadliest weather disasters, and who faces the greatest risks during such prolonged extreme heat?
That's such a good question. And actually, here in Australia, they kill more people than all other natural hazards combined. Certainly, in other parts of the world, there is a very, very, very high mortality impact from extreme heat as well. And they're called the silent killer because these impacts don't necessarily happen straight away. So if you think of another natural disaster, whether it's an earthquake or a flood or a tropical cyclone, the impacts are fairly, they occur fairly much at the same time of the event itself. But with extreme heat, the impact on human health is quite lagged. So even though you might be affected from that heat and that effect is irreversible, often people don't actually pass away until at least a couple of days after the extreme heat. And on top of that, the death isn't usually attributed to the high temperatures. It's often due to cardiac arrest, or in the unfortunate case that I keep hearing time and time again during this current heat wave, death due to drowning because people are trying to stay cool. These are deaths that are caused and or exacerbated by these temperatures, but they're very rarely recorded as such. So it can be very difficult to actually track the true mortality of these events, as well as, in some parts of the world, and that includes Europe too, they are often underreported. So I can't stress enough how deadly extreme heat is. And hearing from your reporter who's located in Paris at the moment, places that aren't used to historically experiencing these temperatures are more susceptible in some ways to these impacts because the infrastructure and the behavioural characteristics aren't there to stay cool, which means mortality impacts can occur at lower temperatures compared to other places that may be more well equipped to these sorts of events.
Exactly. But as you mentioned, it isn't just refined to Europe. We're seeing extreme heat across the globe. We're expecting it here in Asia too, with El Nino coming in, drier summers. And is this the new norm now? If so, how should the world be preparing for seeing record temperatures and such scorching heat waves every summer?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Hearing and looking at some of the temperatures coming out in Europe and the UK at the moment, they're akin to an Australian summer. Where I live in Canberra, we still haven't experienced a 45-degree day yet. Other parts of the country sure have, but it just goes to show just how extreme this particular event is. And we also need to keep in mind that heat waves, they're extreme, they occur anywhere in the world, but they're relative to that location. So arguably, a heat wave in the UK and Europe should be cooler than a heat wave in Australia because the baseline climate is actually a cooler climate. So this heat wave is absolutely one of the worst, if not the worst, the region has experienced. So we do need to take it so much more seriously that everywhere in the world is seeing these events occur at higher frequencies and higher intensities. And while adaptation strategies like more air conditioning will go a long way in protecting against an event when it's actually occurring, we need to think about the bigger picture. We need to design our buildings better. We need to have better ventilation. Even the humble ceiling or pedestal fan goes an enormous way. We need to better educate the public about what they do. So it's not just, these events are going to keep on going. I hazard to say that they're the new normal, because unfortunately, and it really pains me to say this, they're only going to get worse. The event that we're seeing now in Europe is not the worst to come in the future. We've already warmed the planet by roughly 1.5 degrees Celsius, maybe a little less. We're very likely going to stabilize at something much higher than that, say 2 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. So it doesn't, it's not a long bow to draw to think about what the future heat waves will look like. And if this is something that will, be occurring much more regularly in the future, then we certainly need to adapt to events that will definitely be worse than this one. And that's a really hard pill to swallow for pretty much all of us, I think.
Right. Professor, I want to end off with that note. So at this point, it's not much more about prevention. It's about adaptation. Is that correct? Because even if the world succeeds in cutting emissions, will we continue to see such more extreme heat waves coming our way?
Look, I would argue yes, at least in our lifetime. And I want to make clear they're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. We need to do both together. It is absolutely imperative we reduce our emissions and at the global scale as well. It has to be done. There is no question about that, because that stops us warming to 3, 4, maybe even 5 degrees Celsius, which is what we were looking at 10 years ago. On top of that, though, because heat waves like this are happening more often and are more intense, we need to adapt. They will get worse, unfortunately, because we're about to pass that 1.5 degree mark. So likely we'll stabilize the climate at a higher global threshold. So we need to be prepared for what's worse to come. And we can adapt. That's the thing. The vast majority of us can adapt. We just need to have a bit of useful foresight to look at how effective we can make that adaptation be in the next 10 to 20 years.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight. That was Professor Sarah Perkins-Kirkpatrick from Climate Science at the Fenner School of Environment and Society at ANU.